Step away from the counter. I will not ask you again." The words hang in the air of the bank lobby like smoke from a discharged weapon, sharp and acrid and impossible to ignore. Saturday morning light streams through the tall windows of First Regional Bank, casting long rectangles of gold across the marble floor, illuminating dust motes that drift with the lazy indifference of a world that has not yet realized something terrible is about to happen. A woman stands near the reception desk, leather portfolio pressed against her chest like a shield she did not know she would need when she woke up this morning. Her name is Nadine Prescott, though the officer advancing toward her does not know this yet, does not care. To him, she is something else entirely, something that requires handling. The lobby has gone silent in that particular way spaces do when violence becomes possible. 15 customers freeze mid-transaction. A teller's fingers hover over her keyboard. An elderly man clutches his deposit slip like a lifeline. And in the center of it all, a woman in weekend clothes faces a uniformed officer whose hand has migrated to his belt, fingers brushing the tools of his authority with the casual intimacy of long practice. She does not move, does not flinch. Her eyes track his approach with the measured assessment of someone cataloging details for later use. Badge number 3892 visible on his chest. Name tag reading Gentry. The slight tremor in his right hand that suggests adrenaline rather than fear. The way his partner hangs back near the door, already positioning herself with sightlines to the exits, as though expecting this to become something that requires containment. 20 minutes. That is how long Nadine has been sitting in this lobby. 20 minutes of waiting for a notary who was helping another customer. 20 minutes of existing in a space where, apparently, her existence required explanation. The 911 call that summoned these officers plays in her memory with crystal clarity, the words she will later obtain through a records request already burned into her consciousness by the dispatcher who quoted them when she asked why she was being approached. "There is a black woman in the lobby. She has been here 20 minutes. She does not have an account here. Something about her just does not seem right." Something about her. 4 words that transform waiting into suspicion, presence into threat. A Saturday morning errand into this moment, with an officer's palm now rising toward her face in a gesture that has nothing to do with protection and everything to do with power. The slap connects before she can move. Open palm, full force, the crack of skin against skin echoing off marble walls like a gunshot in a cathedral. Her head snaps sideways. She tastes copper where her teeth have cut the inside of her cheek. Heat blooms across her face in a starburst pattern, the kind of pain that makes eyes water involuntarily, that sends signals screaming through nerve endings evolved to recognize danger. She does not stumble, does not cry out, does not give him any of the reactions his action was designed to provoke. Instead, she touches her cheek with careful fingers, feeling the warmth spreading beneath her skin, and counts. 1, 2, 3. The old technique learned in circumstances far more dangerous than this, for forcing clarity through the fog of shock. When she lowers her hand, she is smiling, a small thing, barely perceptible, but present nonetheless. Officer Dale Gentry has no idea what he has just started. The morning had begun with the particular promise that Saturdays carry, the sense of possibility that comes with hours stretching ahead unscheduled and full of potential. Nadine's alarm had chirped at 7:30, earlier than strictly necessary for a weekend, but she had documents to organize and an errand that could not wait until Monday. Her kitchen table held the evidence of a transaction months in the making. Property closing documents spread across the worn wood in careful rows, each page flagged with colored tabs, each signature line highlighted in yellow. The house was nothing special by most standards, a modest 3-bedroom in a neighborhood that real estate agents called transitional when they meant something else entirely. But it was hers, would be hers, once the final signatures were notarized and the paperwork filed. She moved through her morning routine with the efficiency of long practice. Coffee first, strong and black, consumed while standing at the counter reviewing the documents one final time. Then the organizing, the task that others might consider obsessive, but which she understood as essential. Each page checked against the master list, each timestamp verified, each section cross-referenced with the corresponding attachment. Her leather portfolio waited on the counter, the same one she had carried through law school and beyond, its surface worn soft by years of use. She loaded the documents in order, photographs on her phone serving as backup, a checklist in her notes app tracking what went where. The notarization itself would take perhaps 15 minutes, but preparation, she had learned long ago, was the difference between success and the kind of chaos that emerged when details slipped through cracks. By 9:15 she was dressed and ready. Weekend clothes? Nothing special. Dark jeans, a cream-colored blouse, comfortable flats that could handle walking if parking proved difficult. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror and paused for a moment, considering. 34 years old, face that still got carded at restaurants sometimes, hair pulled back in a practical twist. Nothing about her appearance suggested anything other than what she was that morning. A woman running an errand, existing in the world, occupying space she had every right to occupy. The drive downtown took 20 minutes through Saturday traffic that was lighter than weekday rush, but still required attention. First Regional Bank occupied a corner lot in the financial district, its facade of stone and glass projecting the particular authority that banks cultivate, the architectural language of stability and permanence designed to make customers feel their money was safe. Nadine had chosen this location for practical reasons. It was the only branch open Saturday with a notary on staff. Her regular bank did not offer the service on weekends, and Monday would mean taking time off work, rearranging meetings, the cascade of complications that a simple Saturday morning trip could avoid. She found parking in the garage across the street, fed the meter enough coins for an hour, despite expecting to need only half that, and crossed to the bank's entrance with her portfolio tucked under her arm. The lobby was larger than she expected, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, high ceilings that made voices echo and footsteps ring. A handful of customers occupied the teller line, while others sat in leather chairs arranged near a coffee station that offered complimentary refreshments. The atmosphere was one of studied calm, the kind of environment designed to make financial transactions feel civilized rather than transactional. She approached the reception desk, where a young woman with a name tag reading Cassidy looked up with the practiced smile of customer service. "Good morning. Welcome to First Regional. How can I help you today?" "I need to have some documents notarized, closing papers for a property purchase." "Of course. Our notary is currently with another client, but she should be available in about 15 minutes. Would you like to wait?" "That would be fine." Cassidy gestured toward the seating area. "Please make yourself comfortable. Can I offer you coffee while you wait?" "No, thank you." Nadine chose a chair near the window, one that afforded a view of both the entrance and the teller stations. The selection was automatic, a habit developed over years of positioning herself in spaces with awareness of exits and sight lines. She settled into the leather, opened her portfolio, and began reviewing her documents one final time. The 15 minutes would pass quickly. The errand would be completed. She would be home before noon with the last piece of her property purchase secured. This was what she believed at 11:32 a.m. on a Saturday morning in March. By 11:38, the first signs emerged that her belief was misplaced. The woman who appeared from the office behind the teller line moved with the particular confidence of territorial authority. Mid-50s, pearl earrings catching the light, silk blouse that probably cost more than Nadine's entire outfit. Her name tag identified her as Evelyn Marsh, branch manager, and her eyes swept the lobby with the proprietary assessment of someone surveying her domain for irregularities. Those eyes landed on Nadine, stayed there, moved to Cassidy at the reception desk, then back to Nadine with the kind of lingering attention that transforms observation into scrutiny. Nadine noticed because noticing was what she did. She tracked Evelyn's approach toward the reception desk, the way the manager leaned close to Cassidy and spoke in a voice pitched just below normal conversation, but not quite at whisper. The words carried anyway, acoustics of marble and high ceilings betraying the attempted discretion. "Who is that woman? Is she a customer?" Cassidy's response was quieter, harder to catch. But Evelyn's follow-up came through clearly enough. Does she have an account with us? The question that changed everything. Not what is she doing here, which would have had an easy answer. Not how can we help her, which would have been appropriate. But does she have an account, the inquiry that transformed presence into justification, that demanded credentials for the simple act of sitting in a chair? Nadine continued reviewing her documents, though her attention had shifted. She tracked Evelyn's retreat toward her office, the glass-walled space that allowed observation without the awkwardness of direct surveillance. Watched the manager settle behind her desk with her phone already in hand, fingers moving across the screen with the rapid efficiency of someone sending a message, texting someone, or searching for something. At 11:41, the security guard made his first pass. He was older, gray at the temples, uniform that fit a little too snugly around the middle. His patrol brought him within 3 feet of Nadine's chair, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and the faint chemical tang of uniform cleaner. He did not speak, did not make eye contact, just walked past with the deliberate slowness of someone making their presence known. 2 minutes later, he passed again. Nadine made note of this as well. The timing, the trajectory, the way his eyes cut toward her without turning his head, peripheral surveillance that pretended not to be surveillance at all. She had seen this dance before, in stores and restaurants and airport lounges, the choreography of suspicion that plays out in spaces where certain presences require monitoring. At 11:44, Evelyn Marsh approached directly. The smile she wore was the kind that never reaches the eyes, customer service stretched over something harder underneath. She stopped beside Nadine's chair with the posture of someone conferring a favor by acknowledging another person's existence. "Excuse me, ma'am, is there something I can help you with?" Nadine looked up from her documents, meeting Evelyn's gaze with the same composed attention she had maintained throughout. "I am waiting for the notary. The teller said approximately 15 minutes. "And you are a customer here? With the bank?" "I am here to use your notary service, which, as your window sign indicates, is available to the public." A flicker crossed Evelyn's face, the micro-expression of someone whose assumption has encountered an obstacle. She recovered quickly, the smile stretching a fraction wider in compensation. "Of course, we do offer that service. I just wanted to make sure you were being helped. Customer satisfaction is our priority." "I appreciate that. I am fine waiting." Evelyn nodded, but she did not retreat immediately. Her eyes dropped to the portfolio in Nadine's lap, to the documents visible through the open flap, lingering with an interest that went beyond casual curiosity. "Property papers?" "Closing documents, yes." "How exciting. Your first home? Is there something else you need from me?" The question landed with just enough edge to communicate that the conversation had outlived its welcome. Evelyn's smile flickered again, and this time when she retreated toward her office, her heels struck the marble with a sharper cadence than before. From her glass-walled vantage point, she watched Nadine. And Nadine, pretending to review documents she could have recited from memory, watched her right back. At 11:47, Evelyn picked up her phone and began speaking urgently, her free hand gesturing in ways that suggested agitation. She did not look away from Nadine while she spoke. Whatever she was saying, whoever was listening, the subject of the conversation was clear. 3 minutes later, sirens cut through the Saturday morning quiet. If this story has you hooked already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You are not going to want to miss what happens next. The Riverton County 911 Dispatch Center logged the call at 11:49 a.m. Call identifier 2024-1847-SAT. Duration: 2 minutes, 14 seconds. Caller identified as Evelyn Marsh, 47, branch manager at First Regional Bank, downtown location. The transcript would later become evidence, but in the moment, it was simply words traveling through phone lines, triggering responses, setting machinery in motion. The 911 operator's voice came through with practiced calm. 911, what is your emergency? This is not exactly an emergency, but there is a woman in our bank lobby. Black female, mid-30s, casually dressed. She has been sitting here for almost 20 minutes now. She claims she is waiting for the notary, but she does not have an account here. She has some kind of folder with documents, and she keeps looking around the lobby. Something about her just does not seem right to me. Is she threatening anyone, ma'am? Has she made any statements or gestures that concern you? No, not exactly, but she is making our customers uncomfortable. The way she is sitting there, watching everything. I tried to speak with her and she was very defensive. Can you send someone to check it out? I would feel much better if an officer could just verify who she is. We will send a unit to your location. Can you describe her clothing? Dark jeans, cream-colored top. She has a leather folder or portfolio with her. She is sitting in the waiting area near the windows. All right, ma'am. Officers are en route. Please remain on the line until they arrive. Thank you. I just want to make sure everyone is safe. You never know these days. You never know. 3 words that transform uncertainty into justification, that provide cover for suspicion that has no basis beyond its own existence, that allow someone to summon armed officers to a woman holding property documents because something about her does not seem right. The 911 operator noted the call as a report of suspicious activity. Priority, routine. Units dispatched, 2 patrol vehicles. Estimated arrival, 7 minutes. At 11:58 a.m., the blue lights appeared outside First Regional Bank's windows. The first officer through the door moved with the rolling gait of someone accustomed to making entrances. 6'2", shoulders that filled his uniform shirt, hand already resting on his equipment belt in the casual ready position that becomes automatic after enough years on the job. His name tag read Gentry, and his badge number was visible on his chest, 3892. Behind him came a second officer, younger, female, her eyes scanning the lobby with the systematic attention of someone trained to assess threats before engaging. The lobby's ambient noise died as though someone had pressed a mute button. Teller conversations stopped mid-sentence. Customers at the counter turned to watch. The elderly man with his deposit slip pressed himself against the wall, making room for authority to pass. Officer Dale Gentry's eyes swept the space in a single practiced arc and locked onto Nadine with the certainty of a weapon acquiring its target. He crossed the marble floor with purpose, each footfall echoing in the sudden silence, and stopped 3 feet from her chair. Ma'am, we received a call about a disturbance at this location. I am going to need to see some identification. Nadine looked up from her documents, taking in the officer with the same measured assessment she had applied to everyone else that morning. Badge number confirmed. Name tag visible. Partner positioned near the entrance, hand resting near her radio. 2 officers. 4 potential witnesses. 15 customers pretending not to watch while watching everything. She kept her voice level, conversational. There is no disturbance. I am waiting for the notary to become available. That is what we are here to determine. Identification, please. Am I being detained? The question hung in the air between them, simple words carrying legal weight that transformed a casual request into a formal interaction. Gentry's jaw tightened, a small movement but visible to anyone watching closely. I am asking you a simple question, ma'am. And I am asking a legal one. Am I being detained, or am I free to go? I need to verify your identity before I can answer that. With respect, officer, that is not how this works. Under Terry v. Ohio, you need reasonable, articulable suspicion of criminal activity to detain me. Sitting in a bank lobby is not a crime. So I will ask again, am I being detained, or am I free to leave? The lobby had gone completely still. Even the ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. At the reception desk, Cassidy's eyes were wide, her hand frozen above the phone she had been reaching for. Behind the glass walls of her office, Evelyn Marsh watched with the satisfied expression of someone whose suspicions were being validated by the mere presence of police. Gentry took a step closer, reducing the distance between them to something that felt like pressure. Do not lecture me about the law. I am stating it. There is a difference. You think you are smart, is that it? You think quoting case names makes you special? I think it makes me informed. There is a difference in that as well. His partner, Officer Vance, according to her name tag, shifted her weight near the door. Her hand had moved from her radio to rest near her sidearm, not gripping, just hovering, the posture of someone preparing for possibilities. Customers in the teller line began edging toward the exit, the universal instinct to avoid proximity to conflict overriding whatever transactions had brought them here. Gentry leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to something between command and warning. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to show me some identification. You are going to explain what you are doing here. And then, if everything checks out, you can go about your day. Simple. And if I choose to exercise my constitutional right not to identify myself absent probable cause, then things get more complicated. For you." The threat was implicit, but unmistakable. Nadine recognized it for what it was, the fork in the road that separated compliance from confrontation, the moment when a citizen must choose between surrendering rights for convenience or standing on principle and accepting consequences. She had seen this dynamic play out countless times from the other side, had read transcripts and reviewed footage and built cases around exactly these kinds of exchanges. Now she was living one. She closed her portfolio slowly, a deliberate movement that kept her hands visible and her intentions clear. "Officer Gentry, badge number 3892. Officer Vance, badge number 4156. It is 11:59 a.m. on Saturday, March 16th. I have been in this lobby for approximately 30 minutes, waiting for a notary service that is advertised as open to the public. I have not threatened anyone. I have not disturbed anyone. I have not committed any crime that would justify detention or the demand for identification." She met his eyes directly. "I am not required to show you identification, but I am happy to wait here quietly until your supervisor arrives to explain why 2 patrol units responded to a call about a woman sitting in a chair." The words landed with weight. Around them, phones had begun to emerge from pockets and purses, the modern reflex of documentation engaging as customers recognized they might be witnessing something worth preserving. The red recording indicators of smartphone cameras winked in the morning light, silent witnesses multiplying by the second. Gentry's face had gone from red to a deeper shade that suggested pressure building behind his composure. His hand moved from his belt to his radio, then back to his belt, the restless motion of someone uncertain how to proceed in the face of resistance that did not fit his expectations. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "I am making it exactly as hard as the Constitution requires. That is my right." From her glass-walled office, Evelyn Marsh emerged with the triumphant stride of someone whose reinforcements had arrived. She crossed the lobby to position herself beside Officer Gentry, solidarity expressed through proximity, her presence a visible endorsement of his authority. "Officers, thank you so much for coming. This woman has been loitering in our lobby for almost 30 minutes now. She claims to be waiting for the notary, but she does not have an account here, and frankly, she has been making our customers very uncomfortable with her presence." Nadine turned her attention to the bank manager with the same composed focus she had maintained throughout. "Loitering? I was invited to wait by your teller. Cassidy, over there, told me the notary would be approximately 15 minutes. That was at 11:32. It is now noon. Your notary is running late, not me." Evelyn's smile tightened at the edges. "That was before we realized you were not actually a customer here. This is a private establishment. We have the right to ask anyone to leave. Your notary services are advertised as open to the public. There is a sign in your window. I saw it when I entered. It says, and I quote, 'Notary services available. Walk-ins welcome. No appointment necessary.'" The sign existed. Everyone in the lobby could see it, white letters on blue background, positioned in the front window to attract exactly the kind of walk-in traffic Nadine represented. The promise had been made. The terms had been clear. But promises, Nadine had learned, bent when the wrong person tried to use them. Evelyn's expression flickered with the calculation of someone adjusting strategy mid-conversation. "Well, those services are for customers who are actually conducting business with our bank, not just anyone off the street." The sign does not say that. It says walk-ins welcome. It says no appointment necessary. If there are additional restrictions, they should be posted. I do not need to explain our policies to you. You do not. But the officers might want to understand them before they decide whether any crime has been committed that justifies their presence here. Gentry stepped between them, reclaiming control of the interaction with the physical intervention of his body. All right, that is enough. Ma'am, the property owner is asking you to leave. If you refuse, that is criminal trespass under state law. Nadine nodded as though acknowledging a fair point. Georgia Code Section 16-7-21, Criminal Trespass. I am familiar with it. The statute requires that the accused be given notice to depart and refuse to do so. Has anyone actually asked me to leave? Because this is the first I am hearing of it. Silence. Evelyn looked at Gentry. Gentry looked at Vance. Vance looked at the floor. No one had asked Nadine to leave. The police had been summoned, the confrontation had begun, the accusations had been leveled, but the simple prerequisite for the trespass charge they were threatening had never been satisfied. She had not been asked to leave because the point was never about her leaving. The point was about her presence being challenged, her belonging being questioned, her right to occupy space being subordinated to someone else's comfort. Sergeant Victor Sims arrived at 12:07 p.m., his supervisor's vehicle pulling into the loading zone outside, with the casual disregard for parking rules that marked authority. 22 years on the force, according to records that would later be reviewed. 3 commendations for valor. 2 excessive force complaints, both ruled unfounded by internal investigation. A career built on navigating exactly these kinds of situations, smoothing edges, managing optics, ensuring that whatever happened could be explained in terms the department could defend. He entered the bank with the measured stride of command, taking in the scene with a single sweep of experienced eyes. 2 of his officers facing off with a civilian, a bank manager hovering at the periphery, customers with phones raised, documenting everything, the makings of a complaint, a lawsuit, or worse, depending on how the next few minutes unfolded. His voice carried the practiced authority of rank. What do we have here? Gentry turned with obvious relief, the deference of someone happy to hand a problem upward. Possible trespass, Sarge. Subject refuses to identify herself. The bank manager called in a suspicious person report. Sims approached Nadine with a different energy than Gentry had brought, his manner suggesting reason rather than confrontation. The good cop arriving after the bad cop had established the baseline of threat. Ma'am, I am Sergeant Sims. I understand there has been some confusion here. This would all be a lot easier if you would just show us some identification and help us understand the situation. I would be happy to help you understand the situation, Sergeant. I arrived at this bank at 11:32 this morning to have property closing documents notarized. The teller informed me the notary was with another client and would be available in approximately 15 minutes. I took a seat in the waiting area as directed. At some point during the next 20 minutes, the branch manager decided my presence was suspicious and called 911. Your officers arrived and have been demanding my identification without articulating any crime they suspect me of committing. She paused, letting the summary settle. I am not required to identify myself under these circumstances. I have not been told I am being detained. I have not been informed of any crime I am suspected of committing. I am simply waiting for a service that this bank advertises as available to the public. Sims nodded along as though considering her points, the posture of someone willing to listen, even if listening was performance, rather than genuine engagement. I appreciate that perspective, ma'am, but here is the situation from our side. We received a call about a suspicious person. We are required to investigate that call. The quickest way to resolve this is for you to show us some identification. Let us verify who you are, and then everyone can go about their day. And if I decline? Then we have a problem. The property owner has indicated she wants you to leave. If you refuse to leave, that becomes trespass. If you interfere with our investigation, that becomes obstruction. Neither of those outcomes is good for anyone. The escalation ladder, presented as reason. The menu of charges that could be applied to transform non-compliance into criminality. Nadine recognized the technique because she had studied it, had seen it deployed in cases that crossed her desk, had traced the trajectory from request to demand to arrest that characterized so many encounters like this one. Sergeant Sims, badge number 4417. I want to be clear about what is happening here. No one asked me to leave until this moment. Officer Gentry and Officer Vance have been here for nearly 10 minutes, and neither of them requested that I depart. The bank manager accused me of loitering but did not ask me to leave. If you are now asking me to leave, I will comply. But I want it noted that I was asked to leave a public-facing business while waiting for an advertised service, after sitting quietly and disturbing no one. Sims's eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing the woman before him. Most people, by this point in such an encounter, would have produced identification simply to end the confrontation. Most people did not cite badge numbers from memory or reference the specific requirements of trespass statutes. Most people did not speak with the particular precision of someone accustomed to language being used as evidence. You seem to know a lot about the law. Is that a crime? It is an observation. What do you do for a living, ma'am? I work in the legal field. The answer was both true and incomplete, a response that satisfied the question without revealing the full scope of its implications. Sims filed it away, visibly recalculating his approach based on this new information. All right, I am asking you to leave now. Will you comply? Nadine closed her portfolio completely, securing the clasp with a soft click. I will leave, but first I want badge numbers from all officers present, as is my right under the Georgia Open Records Act when requesting identification of public employees in the course of their duties. I will also be filing a formal complaint about the handling of this matter. Gentry stepped forward, his earlier restraint crumbling in the face of what he perceived as continued defiance. You do not just get to demand things and walk out of here like nothing happened. Actually, I do. I have committed no crime. I am choosing to leave after being asked. That ends any potential trespass issue. What happens next depends entirely on whether you allow me to leave or whether you escalate this further. She stood, gathering her portfolio, moving toward the exit with the deliberate unhurriedness of someone refusing to appear rushed or intimidated. The path to the door took her past Officer Vance, past the customers who had been frozen in observation throughout, past the plate glass windows where the morning light still streamed in with complete indifference to the human drama unfolding in its warmth. She was 3 steps from the exit when Gentry moved to block her path. Hold on, you do not just walk away from this. I was told to leave. I am leaving. I did not say you could leave yet. Sergeant Sims did. Are you countermanding your supervisor? The question hung between them, its implications clear to everyone watching. Gentry's face had gone beyond red now, into something darker, the flush of humiliation and fury mixing into a color that suggested danger. His breathing had quickened. His posture had shifted from authoritative to aggressive, weight forward on the balls of his feet, hands moving without conscious direction. Nadine saw it coming, had seen it coming from the moment he blocked her path, the slight telegraphing of shoulder movement, the clenching of his right fist, the particular set of his jaw that preceded action. She could have moved, could have stepped back or to the side, avoided the strike, turned this into a different kind of incident. But something held her still. The understanding, perhaps, that avoidance would only delay what was already inevitable. That this moment, captured on 15 phones and Gentry's own body camera, would matter more than her momentary comfort. That sometimes you had to let people show exactly who they were. This is where things take a turn you will not believe. Make sure you hit that like button so you do not miss a single moment of what comes next. The hand came fast. Open palm, no fist, the kind of strike that leaves marks but gives plausible deniability. Training hall technique, meant to stun rather than injure, to assert dominance without creating the kind of damage that generates paperwork. Except Gentry was not thinking about technique. He was thinking about the woman who had embarrassed him, who had quoted law at him, who had refused to bow to his authority in front of witnesses. The slap connected with her left cheek, the crack of impact echoing off the marble in a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silent lobby. Her head snapped to the side. She tasted copper immediately, the inside of her cheek torn by her own teeth. Heat exploded across her face, nerve endings screaming their alarm. But she did not stumble, did not fall, did not give him the satisfaction of watching her crumble. She straightened slowly, deliberately, turning her head back to face him with the measured control of someone who had just received exactly what they were expecting. Her hand rose to touch her cheek, fingers exploring the heat beneath the skin, the raised flesh where his palm print was already beginning to form. Around them, the silence shattered into chaos. Customers screaming, Vance grabbing her radio, calling for backup that was already too late to prevent what had happened. Sims shouting something, stepping forward, too slow by seconds to have made a difference. And Gentry, standing there with his hand still raised, the dawning realization crossing his face that he had just done something that could not be undone. Nadine spoke into the cacophony, her voice cutting through the noise with the precision of someone trained to be heard in courtrooms. You just committed simple battery under Georgia Code Section 16-5-23, on camera, with witnesses. Every phone in this room has been recording for the past 5 minutes, and your body camera should have captured everything unless you disabled it, which would be its own violation. Gentry's mouth opened and closed. Whatever response he had prepared died before reaching his lips, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had just done and the cold clarity with which this woman was articulating its consequences. Vance's radio crackled with responses to her call, backup units acknowledging, the machinery of emergency response engaging even as the emergency had already passed. Sims stepped between Gentry and Nadine, his face gray with the recognition of a career-defining disaster unfolding in real time. Everyone calm down. Just everyone calm down. Nadine's voice remained level, almost conversational, despite the throb of pain spreading across her face. I am calm, Sergeant. I have been calm throughout this entire encounter. Your officer is the one who escalated a non-violent situation into assault. I was walking toward the door. I was complying with your directive to leave. He blocked my path and struck me. She turned her head slightly, displaying the reddening mark on her cheek to the customers still recording. This is what happens when you wait for a notary while black. This is what happens when you know your rights and assert them. Remember this the next time someone tells you these things do not happen anymore. Remember this the next time someone says there is no difference in how people are treated. Sims reached for her arm, the gesture meant to be guiding but landing as restraint. Ma'am, I need you to come with us to the station. We need to get statements. Sort this out. Am I under arrest? You are being detained. On what charge? His hesitation told her everything, and told. The charges he was constructing in his mind were the standard tools of post hoc justification, the menu of offenses that could be applied to transform a victim into a suspect. Disorderly conduct for arguing with officers. Trespassing for being in a space where someone decided she did not belong. Resisting for not moving fast enough or moving too fast, or existing in a way that required response. Disorderly conduct, trespassing, resisting a lawful order. None of those occurred. You know it. Your body camera knows it. Every phone in this room knows it. She paused, letting the words settle. But I will cooperate with detention. I want this documented properly. I want every violation recorded. And I want immediate medical evaluation as required by your department's use of force policy. She extended her wrists, a gesture of compliance that was also a statement. I am not resisting. I am not being difficult. I am doing everything right, and you are still doing this. Gentry cuffed her with more force than necessary, the metal biting into her wrists as he ratcheted them tighter than protocol allowed. The petty cruelty of someone who knew he had lost control, but could not stop exercising the power he still possessed. She noted the pain without comment, filing it away with everything else she was documenting in the precise chambers of her memory. The walk to the patrol car took them past Evelyn Marsh, who stood near the entrance with an expression that mixed satisfaction with uncertainty, like someone who had gotten what they asked for, but was beginning to suspect it might cost more than expected. Past Cassidy at the reception desk, whose face had gone pale, whose eyes tracked Nadine with something that looked like shame. Past the customers who had witnessed everything, their phones still recording, their faces reflecting the particular discomfort of people who had just seen something wrong happen and done nothing to stop it. In the parking lot, the Saturday sun beat down with indifferent warmth. Other customers emerged from the bank, some hurrying to their cars to escape proximity to the scene, others lingering to watch with the morbid curiosity that attends visible displays of force. A child in a nearby car pressed her face to the window, eyes wide, watching a black woman in handcuffs being placed in a police vehicle for the crime of waiting. The patrol car's interior smelled of vinyl and old coffee, and the faint chemical residue of cleaning supplies that never quite eliminated what they were meant to eliminate. Nadine sat in the back seat, hands cuffed behind her, posture straight despite the discomfort. The door closed with the solid thunk of institutional finality, separating her from the world outside with metal and safety glass, and the particular isolation of custody. Through the window, she watched Sims conferring with Gentry, their body language telling a story of damage control in progress. Watched Vance maintaining distance, her expression suggesting someone calculating which way the wind was blowing and positioning herself accordingly. Watched the bank's entrance, where Evelyn Marsh had finally retreated inside, perhaps sensing that her role in this drama was complete, but its consequences had just begun. The drive to Riverton County Central Precinct took 14 minutes through Saturday traffic that parted for the patrol car's lights. Nadine counted the turns, noted the street names, tracked the route with the automatic attention of someone who preferred to know where she was being taken. Downtown to Industrial District, past the courthouse where she had spent more hours than she could count, past the federal building where her office waited empty, past all the landmarks of a life that felt suddenly very far away. Booking began at 1:43 p.m. and consumed the better part of 2 hours. Fingerprints first, the ink cold and slightly tacky on her skin. Then photographs, the bright flash leaving spots in her vision that persisted for minutes afterward. Personal effects cataloged and placed in a manila envelope. Wallet, phone, keys, the portfolio that had started everything. The documents inside remained untouched, their neat organization preserved even as the woman who had organized them was being processed into the system. The booking officer read off charges in a monotone that suggested how routine this was for him, how unremarkable another body moving through the machinery of arrest. Prescott, Nadine, charges: disorderly conduct, misdemeanor; trespassing, misdemeanor; resisting officer, misdemeanor. She signed where indicated, initialed where required, maintained the composed silence of someone who understood that everything she said could become evidence, and had decided that selective silence served better than attempted explanation. When they asked if she had any medical conditions requiring attention, she responded, "I was struck in the face by Officer Gentry during the arrest. I request medical evaluation as required by your department's use of force policy. I also request documentation of the injury." The booking officer's fingers paused on his keyboard. He looked up for the first time since beginning the process, actually seeing the woman before him rather than simply processing her. His eyes went to her cheek, where the handprint had darkened into something visible even under the fluorescent lights. "I will note that in the file." "Thank you. I will also be requesting my phone call. Under your department's policy, that should be provided within 60 minutes of booking." He checked something on his screen, frowned slightly. "You will get your call when we have an available line. The policy specifies 60 minutes, not when convenient. 60 minutes. I am noting the time for my records." Whatever he typed in response she could not see, but his expression suggested that this was not going the way these bookings usually went, that this woman with her policy citations and precise requests was creating complications that disrupted the smooth flow of institutional routine. The holding cell they placed her in smelled of disinfectant and despair, the particular odor of spaces where hope goes to diminish. Concrete walls painted institutional beige. Metal bench bolted to the floor. Toilet with no seat in the corner, offering privacy only in the most technical sense. She settled onto the bench with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, and waited. The phone call came at 3:47 p.m. 1 hour and 32 minutes after the 60-minute policy deadline. She noted this as well, another violation added to the catalog she was constructing in memory. 3 hours later, at 7:23 p.m., the charges were dropped. The paperwork cited insufficient evidence for prosecution, the bureaucratic language that transformed a wrongful arrest into an administrative non-event. She retrieved her belongings from the property window, checked that everything was present, and made one final request before leaving. "I need copies of my booking documents and the arrest report. I also need a formal complaint form." The property clerk's eyes widened slightly. "A complaint form?" "For the assault, the unlawful arrest, the delayed phone call, the violations of your department's policies that occurred throughout my detention." She left the precinct at 8:15 p.m., stepping into the evening air with the taste of freedom, mixed with the lingering copper of blood in her mouth. Her phone showed 47 missed calls, most from numbers she did not recognize. Voicemails from unknown callers, text messages filled with videos, links, questions. The story had already spread. She scrolled through the notifications with detached curiosity, watching herself become news. Local outlets had picked up the footage from witnesses' phones. Social media had amplified it with the velocity that only outrage provides. Her face appeared in thumbnails and screen captures, the moment of the slap frozen in pixels, shared and reshared across platforms she had never used. She did not watch the videos, did not need to. The memory of the impact remained fresh, the phantom heat still present on her cheek even hours later. Instead, she opened her Notes app and began typing. Everything she remembered, every timestamp she had tracked, every badge number she had noted, every policy violation she had observed. The foundation of what would come next, laid in precise detail while the memories were fresh. The first formal request went out the following Monday. Georgia Open Records Act, properly formatted, citing the relevant statutes and case law. Request for all-body camera footage from Officers Dale Gentry, badge number 3892, Tricia Vance, badge number 4156, and Sergeant Victor Sims, badge number 4417, covering March 16th from 11:45 a.m. through 3 p.m. The response arrived 18 days later. The footage, according to the response, was currently under internal review and could not be released at that time. Estimated availability, 60 to 90 days. 60 to 90 days. The clock of accountability stretched into bureaucratic infinity. The evidence that would prove what happened delayed until memories faded and attention moved elsewhere. But attention did not move elsewhere. The videos from customer phones had seen to that. By the time the department's response arrived, those recordings had accumulated 3.7 million views across platforms. News outlets had run segments. Civil rights organizations had issued statements. The story had achieved the particular momentum that made suppression impossible and control merely damage limitation. The internal affairs complaint went in on day one, before she even left the precinct. Complaint number IA-20-24-0892. Complainant, Nadine Prescott. Subject officers, Dale Gentry, Tricia Vance, Victor Sims. Allegations: unlawful detention, assault and battery, civil rights violations, policy violations related to phone call timing and medical evaluation requests. Status: under investigation. 3 weeks passed in a blur of documentation and response. She filed 7 formal requests, each carefully crafted to obtain specific records, each generating its own timeline of acknowledgement, processing, and eventual fulfillment or denial. The machine of accountability moved slowly, but it moved, grinding through procedures that had been designed to make exactly this kind of persistence difficult. For those of you still here, this story is just getting started. Drop a like if you are ready to see what happens when these officers find out who they really picked a fight with. On day 12, a woman approached her table at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the Federal Building. Denise Holloway moved with the economy of motion that marked someone who had spent years learning to navigate spaces without drawing attention. Mid-40s, practical haircut, clothes that were professional but unremarkable. She carried a folder under her arm, thin enough to suggest minimal contents, but thick enough to matter. "Ms. Prescott, may I join you?" Nadine looked up from the laptop where she had been drafting yet another records request. The woman's face was familiar, a colleague from contexts that had nothing to do with bank lobbies or Saturday morning errands. "Denise, this is not a coincidence." "No, it is not." Holloway settled into the chair across from her, placing the folder on the table between them with the deliberate care of someone handling evidence. Her eyes swept the coffee shop once, the automatic survey of someone trained to note exits and occupants, before returning to Nadine. "The body camera footage you have been requesting through open records. A copy arrived at my office this morning, before the department released it to me. Months before, if they follow their usual delay patterns." She opened the folder, revealing a USB drive and several printed pages of what appeared to be timestamps and file logs. "Anonymous source. Someone inside wants this seen, and what it shows, you need to watch this." Nadine took the folder, her fingers tracing the edge of the printed pages. Chain of custody documentation, authentication records showing the files had been verified against the department's original storage. Whoever had sent this understood what would be required to make the footage admissible. "Why send it to you?" Holloway's expression shifted, something passing behind her eyes that suggested complexity beyond this single conversation. "Because they know who you are, who you really are, and they know that you will do something about this, something effective." The USB drive felt heavier than its physical weight warranted. On it, Nadine would later discover, was everything. The complete footage from all 3 officers' cameras, the dispatch audio, the booking records with their timestamp discrepancies documented, the internal communications that showed how the story was being shaped before the ink was dry on the official reports, including one particular segment that made everything else irrelevant. Timestamp 12, 18 and 47 seconds. Officer Gentry's chest camera perspective. Nadine visible in frame, walking toward the exit. Hands at her sides, portfolio under her arm, posture relaxed, compliant, the body language of someone doing exactly what she had been asked to do. Timestamp 12, 18 and 52 seconds. Gentry's right hand enters the frame from below, moving upward. Open palm. Full extension. Contact with Nadine's left cheek. Her head snapping sideways. The sound of impact, distinct even through the compressed audio of body camera recording. Timestamp 12, 18 and 53 seconds. Nadine's voice, clear and steady despite what has just happened. "You just committed simple battery under Georgia Code Section 16-5-23. The footage continued, capturing everything that followed. The chaos, the radio calls, the arrest. Every moment documented in the unblinking record of equipment that could not be argued with or intimidated or convinced to remember things differently. And then there was the incident report, filed by Sergeant Sims at 4:47 p.m. that same day. The report that would later be compared against the footage, word by word, claim by claim. The report stated, "Subject made sudden movement toward waistband area, prompting defensive response from Officer Gentry." The footage showed Nadine's hands at her sides. No movement toward waistband. No aggressive gesture. No justification for any defensive response whatsoever. The report stated, subject was verbally aggressive and non-compliant throughout the encounter. The footage showed Nadine speaking in level tones, citing legal statutes, exercising rights she was entitled to exercise, complying with the request to leave when it was finally, belatedly issued. The report stated, physical contact was necessary to prevent subject from fleeing the scene. The footage showed Nadine walking toward the exit at normal pace, not running, not fleeing, simply leaving as she had been instructed to do. Lies, documented lies, contradicted by the officer's own cameras, filed in official reports that would have become the authoritative record of events if no other evidence existed. But other evidence did exist. The customer videos, the anonymous sources package, the meticulous documentation that Nadine herself had maintained throughout. And now, with the body camera footage in hand, The full scope of what had happened became undeniable. The question was no longer what had occurred. The question was, what would be done about it? Holloway watched Nadine review the printed summaries, her expression unreadable but attentive. The question is whether we pursue this administratively or criminally. The language of that question landed with particular weight. We, not you, but we. The pronoun of collaboration, of institutional resources being brought to bear. Nadine looked up from the documents, meeting Holloway's eyes with the focused attention of someone assembling pieces into a larger picture. Who else knows about this? The people who need to know, for now. Holloway paused, choosing her next words with visible care. There is more here than one bad arrest, Nadine. The pattern goes deeper than Gentry or Sims. The way this was handled, the speed of the cover story, the delay tactics on the records requests. Someone coordinated this response, someone with authority. Deputy Chief Cole, among others, but he is the thread we can pull. She slid another page across the table, a printout of what appeared to be internal communications. His interview with you after the arrest. You said he made misrepresentations about what the footage showed, that he suggested you had made sudden movements, that he implied you bore some responsibility for how things escalated, all of which the footage disproves, all of which the footage documents him lying about while in an official capacity. That is not just policy violation, that is potential witness intimidation, obstruction, conduct that rises to federal interest. The implications expanded with each word, not just a local matter, not just departmental discipline, something larger, with longer arms and sharper teeth. Nadine closed the folder, her decision crystallizing into certainty. Both. Administrative complaint is already filed. Criminal referral under 18 U.S.C., Section 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Gentry for the assault. Sims for the false report. Cole for the cover-up. The union will fight this. Hard. Let them. The footage is unambiguous. He struck me. It is recorded. There is no interpretation that makes that acceptable. Holloway nodded, the gesture conveying approval that went beyond professional acknowledgement. Then we proceed. I will coordinate with the Civil Rights Division. You document everything. Every contact from the department, every delay, every attempt to shape the narrative. We build this properly, and we build it to last. She stood, leaving the folder on the table. One more thing. The anonymous source who sent the footage. They also sent this. A final page slid across the table. An internal email, partially redacted but damning in what remained visible. From, redacted, rivertoncounty.gov. To, redacted. Subject, Saturday situation. Date, March 16th, 2:47 p.m. The bank manager is connected to, redacted. Make sure this does not blow back. Handle the paperwork and we will discuss Monday. 2:47 p.m. Hours after the assault, before Nadine was even released. Someone was already managing the narrative, already coordinating the cover-up, already treating what had happened as a public relations problem rather than a civil rights violation. Connected to someone. Handle the paperwork. Discuss Monday. The threads of conspiracy extended further than a single officer's anger and a single manager's phone call. This was systematic, coordinated, the kind of institutional response that only emerged when protecting the wrong people mattered more than serving the right ones. Holloway was halfway to the door when she turned back, her expression holding something that might have been admiration or might have been warning. They do not know who you are yet, that you are one of us. When they find out, the response will intensify. Are you prepared for that? Nadine touched her cheek, where the bruise had faded from purple to yellow, but still remained, a reminder written in skin that some things could not be erased simply because powerful people wished them to disappear. I have been prepared for this my entire career. I just did not expect it to become personal. It always becomes personal. That is what they do not understand about people like us. Every case is personal. Every victim is someone. The difference is that this time, someone has the tools to fight back. She left, the coffee shop door closing behind her, with the soft chime of bells that marked the boundary between inside and outside, safety and exposure, what had been and what was about to be. Nadine remained at her table, the folder of evidence before her, the anonymous email with its redacted names and damning implications, the weight of what came next settling onto shoulders that had carried burdens before, but never quite this one. On her phone, new messages continued to arrive. Media requests, support from strangers, the particular flood of attention that accompanied viral moments of injustice. She ignored them all, focusing instead on the work that mattered. Open her laptop, create a new folder, label it with the date and the case reference number she would be assigned when the federal complaint was filed. Begin the methodical process of organizing evidence that would survive scrutiny, that would withstand challenge, that would build toward consequences that actually stuck. The body camera footage first, transferred from USB to encrypted storage, backed up to 3 separate locations. Chain of custody documentation, authentication records, the timestamps that proved when the files were created, accessed, copied. Then the incident reports, each lie highlighted and cross-referenced against the footage that disproved it. The booking records with their phone call timing, the medical evaluation that had been requested and documented but never provided. The 911 call transcript, obtained through her initial records request, with its "something about her" framing that set everything in motion. The witness statements she would gather in the days to come, from customers who had recorded and customers who had only watched, building the contemporaneous record that corroborated what the cameras captured. And at the bottom of the pile, saved for last, the internal affairs complaint she had filed, the one that was currently under investigation, the one that would eventually require response from officers who did not yet know that the response they gave would be compared against evidence they could not explain away. The work continued through the afternoon and into the evening, the coffee shop's other customers coming and going while she remained, building the case that would eventually change everything. Not just for Gentry, who had thrown away his career in a moment of entitled rage. Not just for Sims, who had protected the wrong officer with the wrong lies. But for the system that had made both of those choices possible, that had trained them to expect immunity, that had rewarded covering up rather than cleaning up. Somewhere in the city, those officers went about their days, Gentry perhaps feeling the first stirrings of concern as the viral videos accumulated views. Sims perhaps coordinating with union representatives about how to frame the narrative. Cole perhaps reassuring himself that rank provided protection, that the blue wall would hold, that this too would pass like so many inconvenient incidents before. They did not yet know what was coming, did not know who sat in that coffee shop, building their destruction from evidence they had themselves created, did not know that the woman they had dismissed as just another civilian, just another complaint, just another problem to be managed, held credentials that transformed their actions from local embarrassment to federal interest. They would find out. Soon enough, they would all find out. But for now, Nadine worked, and waited, and documented everything with the meticulous precision of someone who understood that justice was not an event but a process, slow and frustrating and never guaranteed, but possible when someone decided to do the work. The sun set over Riverton County, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that she did not notice because she was focused on evidence logs and timestamp comparisons and the careful construction of a case that would survive every attack the system could throw at it. 49 days after the assault, the letter would arrive at Department Headquarters, Department of Justice letterhead, Civil Rights Division, the formal notification that a preliminary inquiry had been opened under 34 U.S.C., Section 12601, the statute that authorized federal investigation into patterns and practices of civil rights violations by law enforcement agencies. Pattern or practice. The words that meant oversight, that meant monitors, that meant the end of business as usual and the beginning of accountability that could not be negotiated away in union contracts or buried in administrative procedures. But that was 49 days away. For now, there was only the work. the evidence. The patient accumulation of truth that would eventually overwhelm the lies. And the woman doing that work, her cheek still faintly marked by a handprint that was already fading from visible to invisible, but that would never truly disappear from memory or from record. She closed her laptop at 9:15 p.m., the coffee shop closing around her, the staff beginning their end-of-day routines, gathered her materials, checked that everything was properly secured, backed up, preserved, walked out into the night with the folder under her arm, the same way she had walked into the bank that Saturday morning, with documents that needed attention and tasks that needed completion. The difference was that now she knew exactly what those tasks were, and exactly how to complete them. The night air carried the particular coolness of early spring, that in-between season when warmth was promised but not yet delivered. She walked toward her car with steady steps, aware of her surroundings in the way she was always aware, noting the other pedestrians, the parked vehicles, the spaces between streetlights where shadows gathered. A different woman might have been afraid, might have looked over her shoulder, worried about retaliation, concerned about becoming a target. But fear was a luxury she could not afford, and caution was built into her movements anyway, trained deep by years of navigating spaces where her presence was questioned and her authority was challenged. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new requests to file, new evidence to gather. The machinery of justice was slow, but she had learned long ago that slow did not mean stopped, that persistence eventually overcame resistance, that documented truth was harder to ignore than convenient lies. She reached her car, unlocked it, settled into the driver's seat with the folder placed carefully on the passenger side. The engine started on the first try, a small reliability in a day filled with uncertainties. The radio came on automatically, tuned to a news station she rarely listened to but never bothered to change. The lead story was about something political, distant, and abstract, the kind of news that affected everyone and no one in particular. She turned it off, preferring the silence, preferring to think without distraction. The drive home took 20 minutes through streets that were familiar and unremarkable, the geography of a life that had been upended but not destroyed. Her apartment waited, small but sufficient, the space she had made her own through years of accumulating books and routines and the particular comforts that single living provided. She parked in her usual spot, walked up the 2 flights of stairs, unlocked her door and entered the space that was hers, where no one could demand identification or question her presence or make her justify her existence. The folder went on the kitchen table, next to the property documents that still waited for notarization. The irony was not lost on her, that simple errand still incomplete, that Saturday morning's purpose still unfulfilled while its consequences expanded far beyond anything she could have anticipated. She would find another notary, a different bank, complete the purchase that had brought her to First Regional in the first place. But that was a task for another day, when the current crisis had resolved into whatever shape it would ultimately take. For now, there was only rest, the particular exhaustion that came from sustained focus and high stakes, from maintaining composure under circumstances designed to break it. Her body registered the fatigue first, muscles she had not realized she was tensing finally releasing their grip. She made tea. Simple comfort, the ritual of boiling water and steeping leaves providing a meditative rhythm that smoothed the edges of the day. Settled onto her couch with the cup warming her hands, the silence of her apartment wrapping around her like a blanket. Tomorrow, the work would continue. The documents would multiply. The responses would come, some helpful and some obstructive, all of them requiring attention and assessment and incorporation into the growing case. But tonight, she allowed herself the luxury of stillness, of not planning or documenting or anticipating the next move, of simply being in a space where her presence required no justification and her existence was not a problem to be solved. The tea cooled slowly. The night deepened outside her windows, and somewhere in the city, the officers who had changed her Saturday were sleeping or not sleeping, unaware that their actions had set in motion forces they could not control and consequences they could not escape. Justice was coming. Slowly, yes. Incompletely, certainly. But coming nonetheless. And Nadine Prescott, whose name they had not bothered to learn before they struck her, would be the one delivering it. The weeks that followed moved with the grinding inevitability of institutional machinery, each day bringing new documents to file and new obstacles to navigate. Nadine established a rhythm that accommodated both her regular responsibilities and the growing demands of her complaint, mornings spent on the work that paid her salary, and evenings dedicated to building a case that would eventually reveal just how much that salary entitled her to pursue. The internal affairs investigation proceeded at the pace bureaucracies preferred, which was to say, barely at all. Status updates arrived in form letters that said nothing while appearing to say something, the particular language of institutions protecting themselves from accountability while maintaining the appearance of process. Investigation ongoing. Evidence under review. Updates will be provided as appropriate. But Nadine had other channels. The Georgia Open Records Act requests continued their methodical march through department file rooms, each one carefully constructed to obtain specific pieces of the puzzle while avoiding the kind of broad fishing expedition that gave agencies grounds for delay or denial. She requested dispatch audio, call logs, training records for officers, Gentry, Vance, and Sims, use of force reports from the previous 3 years, complaint histories, the paper trail of a department that documented everything and remembered nothing inconvenient. The responses came in waves, some prompt and others delayed past statutory deadlines in ways that generated their own complaints, their own documentation, their own evidence of obstruction. When the department claimed certain records were exempt from disclosure, she filed appeals that cited case law chapter and verse. When they redacted information that should have been public, she challenged the redactions with the precision of someone who understood exactly which exemptions applied and which were convenient fictions. By day 23, a pattern had emerged from the accumulated records. Officer Dale Gentry's file contained 4 previous complaints, all ruled unfounded or exonerated after internal investigation. Use of force incidents that ended with suspects injured, and narratives that blamed the suspects for their own injuries. A disciplinary history that showed not consequences but the absence of them. The institutional protection extended to officers whose behavior should have generated intervention long before a Saturday morning in a bank lobby. Sergeant Victor Sims's record was cleaner on the surface but troubling in its gaps. Promoted through ranks with unusual speed. Commendations that came from commanders rather than community members. A career trajectory that suggested political savvy rather than exemplary service. The ability to navigate institutional currents in ways that benefited advancement over accountability. Deputy Chief Warren Cole's file required a different approach entirely. His records were partially shielded by exemptions that applied to command staff, personnel matters that touched policy decisions rather than individual conduct. But his public statements were available. His testimony before City Council, his presentations to community groups, the documented record of a leader who spoke constantly about reform while presiding over a department where complaints disappeared into administrative black holes. The anonymous source who had sent the body camera footage continued to provide material, each delivery arriving through channels designed to preserve anonymity while maintaining the authentication necessary for evidence. Internal communications that showed how narratives were shaped. Training materials that revealed what officers were actually taught versus what the department publicly claimed. Budget documents that tracked how settlement funds were hidden in line items that avoided the scrutiny of oversight committees. On day 31, a new document arrived. Transcript of an interview conducted by Internal Affairs with Officer Tricia Vance, the second officer on scene, the one who had hung back near the entrance while her partner escalated toward violence. The transcript was 47 pages long, the record of a woman choosing her words with care, born from the recognition that her career balanced on what she said and what she withheld. Nadine read it 3 times, marking passages that would matter later. Question from IA investigator. In your observation, did the subject make any sudden movements prior to Officer Gentry's physical intervention? Vance's response. I was focused on maintaining situational awareness of the environment. I did not have a clear view of the specific interaction between Officer Gentry and the subject at the moment of contact. the careful non-answer of someone who had seen everything and was choosing to see nothing, who understood that contradicting a fellow officer's account carried consequences that extended far beyond this single investigation, who was protecting herself by protecting him, the mathematics of institutional survival trumping the ethics of honest testimony. But there were cracks in the wall she was building. Later in the transcript, when questions turned to the events after the slap, her responses showed less certainty. Question: Did you hear the subject make any threatening statements toward Officer Gentry? Response: I heard her say something about a statute, Georgia Code something. She was citing legal language. Question: Did she raise her voice? Make aggressive gestures? Response: She was controlled. Very controlled. She did not yell or move aggressively that I observed. Question: In your professional assessment, did the subject's behavior prior to physical contact warrant a defensive response? A long pause, noted in the transcript. Then, I would need to review the footage to give an accurate assessment. The footage she had already seen. The footage that contradicted every justification her partner had offered. The footage that would eventually force her to choose between loyalty and truth, between protecting Gentry and protecting herself. Nadine marked that passage with particular attention. Officer Vance was the weak point in the wall of silence, the one whose certainty wavered when pressed, the one who might, under the right circumstances with the right assurances, decide that cooperation served her interests better than continued complicity. Day 37 brought the first direct contact from the department since her release. Not an official communication, not a status update on her complaint, but a phone call from a number she did not recognize. The voice on the other end identified himself as Captain Marcus Webb, Commander of Internal Affairs. His tone carried the particular blend of authority and accommodation that characterized damage control rather than investigation. Ms. Prescott, I wanted to reach out personally regarding your complaint. I understand you have been frustrated with the pace of our investigation, and I want to assure you that we are taking this matter very seriously. She listened without interrupting, letting him establish whatever narrative he had prepared. I also want to offer you the opportunity to meet with me directly, off the record, to discuss your concerns and perhaps find a path toward resolution that serves everyone's interests. Off the record. Resolution that serves everyone's interests. The language of settlement wrapped in the appearance of concern. Captain Webb, I appreciate the outreach. However, any discussions regarding my complaint should be conducted through official channels with proper documentation. I have no interest in off-the-record conversations that cannot be verified or referenced later. Silence on the line, the particular pause of someone whose script had encountered unexpected resistance. Ms. Prescott, I am trying to help you here. These situations can get complicated when they become adversarial. A conversation might help us understand each other's perspectives and find common ground. My perspective is documented in my complaint. Officer Gentry struck me in the face without provocation. The incident was recorded on body cameras and civilian phones. The arrest that followed was based on false charges that were subsequently dropped. I do not see room for interpretation in those facts. Facts can be complicated. Context matters. The officers were responding to a legitimate call about a suspicious person. They were doing their jobs. Their job is to protect and serve, not to assault citizens who assert their constitutional rights. And the call was not about a suspicious person committing a crime. It was about a black woman waiting in a bank lobby. That distinction matters, and I expect your investigation to address it. The conversation ended shortly after, Webb's tone shifting from accommodating to clipped, the recognition settling that this complainant would not be managed or mollified or convinced to accept whatever resolution the department preferred. Nadine documented the call immediately. Date, time, duration, summary of statements made. The pattern of pressure beginning to emerge, the institutional response to complaints that refused to disappear quietly. If you are following this story, now is a perfect time to hit that subscribe button. What happens next is going to change everything. Day 42 brought Denise Holloway back into the frame, this time with news that expanded the scope of everything Nadine had been building. They met at a different location this time, a small park near the riverfront where conversations could happen without the ambient noise of coffee shops or the potential for interested ears. Holloway arrived with a briefcase that suggested serious business, her expression carrying the particular intensity of someone about to deliver information that mattered. The preliminary inquiry has been approved. We are moving forward with a formal investigation under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601. Pattern or practice. The federal statute that authorized Department of Justice investigation into systemic civil rights violations by law enforcement agencies. Not just Gentry's assault, but the entire department. Not just one incident, but the institutional culture that made incidents like this possible and predictable. Holloway continued, laying out the scope with the precision of someone who had already mapped the territory. Your case is the catalyst, but it is not the only evidence. We have been monitoring this department for 18 months. Complaint patterns, settlement payouts, use of force statistics that deviate significantly from comparable jurisdictions. The body camera footage from your arrest fits a documented pattern of response to citizens who assert their rights. How many other cases? 17 that we have identified as potentially actionable. Yours has the advantage of clear video evidence and a complainant who understands how to document violations, but the pattern extends beyond your experience. 17 other people whose encounters with Riverton County law enforcement had generated the kind of documentation that federal investigators found interesting. 17 other stories of rights violated and complaints buried and institutional protection extended to officers who should have faced consequences. What happens next? Formal notification goes to the department within a week. They will have an opportunity to respond, to provide records, to make arguments about why federal intervention is unnecessary. Those arguments will fail because we have already seen enough to know intervention is warranted. Then comes the consent decree negotiation, the terms under which the department will operate with federal oversight, the reforms they will implement, the monitoring that will ensure implementation actually occurs. The timeline Holloway described stretched months into the future, the slow grind of institutional change that moved at bureaucratic pace rather than human urgency. But it was movement, progress, the machinery of accountability engaging in ways that individual complaints alone could never achieve. And Gentry? Sims? Cole? Individual accountability proceeds on a separate track. The pattern or practice investigation addresses systemic issues. Criminal referrals for individual officers address personal conduct. Your complaint supports both tracks, and the evidence you have gathered strengthens both cases. Criminal referrals. The words carried weight that administrative complaints could not match. Not just discipline within the department, but potential prosecution under federal law. 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. The statute that made what Gentry had done not just a policy violation, but a federal crime. What do you need from me? Holloway opened her briefcase, removing a folder thick with documents. We need you to testify, before the grand jury, when we present the criminal referral. At the administrative hearing, when the department attempts to defend its officers. In the consent decree negotiations, when your experience becomes evidence of why federal oversight is necessary. You know I cannot do that anonymously. No, which is why we need to discuss timing. When your identity becomes public record, the response will intensify. The department will attempt to discredit you. The union will claim political motivation. The officers' attorneys will try to make this about your career rather than their conduct. The moment that had been approaching since the assault finally arrived. The decision point where her professional identity would merge with her experience as a victim, where the protections of anonymity would give way to the exposure of public testimony. I am ready. Are you certain? Once this becomes public, there is no going back. Every case you have ever worked will be scrutinized. Every defendant you have ever prosecuted will claim bias. Your professional life and your personal experience will become permanently intertwined. Nadine considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. The career implications were real. The scrutiny would be intense. The attacks on her credibility would come from every direction, as they always did when someone with authority challenged the institutions that granted that authority. But the alternative was worse. Silence meant complicity. Anonymity meant protection for those who counted on victims remaining invisible. Her position gave her resources that most victims lacked, the ability to navigate systems that defeated people without her training and connections. To use those resources for her own protection while abandoning others to the same treatment she had received would be a betrayal of everything her career was supposed to represent. I became a prosecutor to hold people accountable when they abuse power. The fact that I was the victim of such abuse does not change that mission. It clarifies it. Holloway nodded, the gesture carrying respect that went beyond professional courtesy. Then we proceed. The letter goes out in 7 days. Your name will not be in the initial notification, but once hearings begin, your testimony will be public record. 7 days. 1 week until the department learned that federal oversight was coming. 1 week until the officers who had dismissed her as just another civilian discovered that their actions had triggered consequences beyond anything their institutional protections could shield. She spent those 7 days in preparation, organizing evidence into the format federal prosecutors required, drafting the statement she would give at administrative hearings, coordinating with Holloway's team on the timing and sequence of disclosures. And on the 7th day, the letter arrived. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Special Litigation Section. 2. Riverton County Sheriff's Department. Notification of formal investigation. Under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601. The Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, hereby notifies the Riverton County Sheriff's Department that a formal investigation has been initiated concerning whether the department has engaged in a pattern or practice of conduct that deprives persons of rights, privileges, or immunities secured by the Constitution or laws of the United States. This investigation is being conducted pursuant to the authority granted to the Attorney General under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601. The investigation will examine, among other matters, the department's use of force policies and practices, the handling of complaints against officers, and the department's response to allegations of civil rights violations. The department is required to preserve all records, documents, and communications that may be relevant to this investigation. Failure to preserve relevant materials may result in adverse inference or other appropriate sanctions. A formal request for documentation will follow this notification within 10 business days. The department's full cooperation is expected and required. The letter went out on day 49, exactly 7 weeks after Nadine had walked into First Regional Bank with property documents and walked out in handcuffs. 7 weeks that had transformed a Saturday morning errand into a federal investigation that would reshape an entire department. The response was immediate and predictable. Press conferences where department leadership expressed confidence in their officers and concern about federal overreach. Union statements that characterized the investigation as politically motivated and procedurally inappropriate. Attorney appearances on local news programs arguing that isolated incidents did not constitute patterns, that good officers were being tarred by the actions of individuals, that external interference threatened the department's ability to keep the community safe. None of it mattered. The investigation was proceeding regardless of public relations efforts. The evidence had already been gathered. The pattern had already been documented. The machinery of federal oversight had engaged, and no amount of spin would disengage it. Day 67 brought the administrative hearing that would determine the immediate fate of the officers involved in Nadine's arrest. Not criminal proceedings, not yet, but the internal process that would decide whether Gentry, Sims, and others would face termination, suspension, or exoneration. The hearing room occupied the second floor of the county administrative building, a space designed for exactly these proceedings, with tables arranged to separate accusers from accused and a panel of 3 administrative judges presiding from an elevated bench. The formality was intentional, the trappings of justice applied to a process that often delivered something less. Nadine entered through a side door reserved for witnesses, her path kept separate from the officers whose conduct was being reviewed. She carried no notes, no documents, nothing but the memory of events she had rehearsed until they flowed as naturally as breathing. The evidence she would reference had already been submitted, authenticated, entered into the record through procedures that ensured it could not be challenged on technical grounds. The gallery was fuller than expected for an administrative hearing, journalists and community members and departmental representatives filling seats that were usually empty for these proceedings. Her case had attracted attention that extended beyond the usual participants in such matters, the viral videos and federal investigation combining to make this more than routine discipline. Captain Webb presided over the presentation of the department's case, his earlier attempt at off-the-record resolution having failed to prevent exactly the public airing he had sought to avoid. He walked the panel through the official narrative, the one constructed from incident reports and carefully worded statements, the version of events that bore little resemblance to what the cameras had captured. Officers responded to a legitimate call for service regarding a suspicious person. Upon arrival, they attempted to verify the individual's identity as part of routine investigation. The subject was non-compliant and made statements that suggested familiarity with criminal proceedings, raising officer safety concerns. When the subject attempted to leave the scene before the investigation was complete, Officer Gentry made a defensive movement to prevent flight. Defensive movement, the euphemism that transformed an assault into procedure that sanitized violence with the language of training manuals and use of force continuums. Nadine listened without reaction, her expression maintained in the neutral mask that courtroom experience had made automatic. The panel reviewed the body camera footage next, played on monitors positioned for all parties to observe. Timestamp 12:18 and 47 seconds. The walk toward the exit. The blocking of her path. The hand rising, connecting. The sound of impact that no euphemism could soften. As you can see, Webb continued, the subject's movement was sudden, and Officer Gentry responded in accordance with his training to prevent potential flight from the scene. One of the panelists, a woman whose nameplate identified her as Judge Helen Carruthers, leaned forward. Captain Webb, the footage shows the subject walking at normal pace toward the exit. Where is the sudden movement you are describing? Webb's pause lasted 2 seconds too long, the delay of someone whose script had encountered unexpected challenge. The movement toward the exit itself was unexpected given the ongoing investigation. Walking toward an exit is unexpected? In context, yes. The officers were attempting to complete their investigation. Had they informed the subject that she was being detained and not free to leave? Another pause. That conversation was ongoing. I see. Judge Carruthers made a note, her pen moving across paper with the deliberate attention of someone documenting inconsistency for later reference. When Nadine's turn to testify arrived, she approached the witness table with the composed bearing that had characterized her conduct throughout the encounter. The panel had already reviewed her written statement, her complaint, her documentation of subsequent interactions with the department. What remained was the human element, the testimony that would either confirm or complicate the narrative the evidence had established. She began with the morning's timeline, reconstructing events with the precision that hours of preparation had refined. Arrival at the bank, interaction with the teller, the waiting, the manager's attention, the gradual accumulation of surveillance that preceded the call. At approximately 11:49, I observed the branch manager, Evelyn Marsh, making a phone call while watching me from her office. I later obtained the 911 transcript for that call through a records request. She recited the relevant portion from memory, the words burned into her consciousness by repetition. There is a black woman in the lobby. She has been here 20 minutes. She does not have an account here. Something about her just does not seem right. The room absorbed the words with the particular silence that accompanies uncomfortable truth. Something about her. The formulation that transformed existence into suspicion, presence into probable cause. She continued through the officers' arrival, their demands, her responses. The citations she had offered, the rights she had asserted, the escalation that proceeded despite her compliance with every legitimate request. At 12:18 and 52 seconds, according to the timestamp on Officer Gentry's body camera, I was walking toward the exit in compliance with Sergeant Sims' directive that I leave the premises. Officer Gentry blocked my path. I stopped. He struck me across the face with his open palm. I did not resist, did not make threatening gestures, did not do anything that could reasonably be interpreted as justifying physical force. One of the male panelists, whose nameplate read Judge Anthony Rivera, interrupted. The department's position is that you made a sudden movement. How do you respond to that characterization? I respond by inviting the panel to review the footage frame by frame. My hands were at my sides. I was walking at normal pace. There is no sudden movement because none occurred. The characterization is false, and the footage proves it is false. Strong words. Accurate words. The purpose of body cameras is to create objective records of officer interactions. When those records contradict officer statements, one of two conclusions follows. Either the camera is wrong or the officer is wrong. I do not believe anyone on this panel would suggest the camera invented footage that did not occur. The testimony continued for 2 hours, covering every aspect of the encounter and its aftermath. The arrest on charges that were subsequently dropped. The delayed phone call that violated department policy. The medical evaluation that was requested but never provided. The incident report that contradicted the visual evidence in specific, documentable ways. When the department's attorney finally rose for cross-examination, his approach was predictable. Attack the witness's credibility, suggest ulterior motives, imply that her knowledge of legal procedures indicated something sinister rather than simply education. Ms. Prescott, you seem remarkably familiar with police procedures and legal statutes. Where did you acquire this knowledge? The question that would change everything. The moment where anonymity ended and exposure began. I acquired it through my professional training and experience. And what profession would that be? She met his eyes directly, then turned to address the panel rather than the questioner. I am an assistant United States attorney with the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. I have spent the past 4 years prosecuting civil rights violations, including violations by law enforcement officers who abuse their authority. I know police procedures because I have built cases against officers who violated them. I know legal statutes because I have used them to hold people accountable when they deprived citizens of their constitutional rights. The room's atmosphere transformed in an instant. The department attorney's face drained of color. Webb's posture shifted from confident to defensive. In the gallery, journalists leaned forward, phones already emerging to capture the moment when this story became something larger than a single assault complaint. On March 16th, I walked into First Regional Bank as a private citizen, seeking a public service advertised by that establishment. I was surveilled, reported as suspicious, confronted by officers who demanded identification without legal basis, and ultimately assaulted by an officer whose training should have taught him that striking compliant citizens is never acceptable. The fact that I happen to have professional expertise in exactly these matters does not make my experience less valid. If anything, it makes the violations more egregious, because these officers treated a federal prosecutor the same way they apparently treat any black woman who has the audacity to assert her constitutional rights. She paused, letting the words settle, then continued with the weight of authority she had concealed until this moment. I am not here to leverage my position for special treatment. I am here because if this is how officers treated me, knowing I would understand every violation they committed and have the resources to document every failure, then I can only imagine how they treat people who lack those advantages. My complaint is not about one bad day or one bad officer. It is about a department that has fostered a culture where this conduct is possible, predictable, and protected. This is the moment everything changes. If you have been waiting for justice, hit that like button and stick around for what comes next. The cross-examination collapsed shortly after. The attorney had prepared to challenge a civilian complainant, not to confront a federal prosecutor whose professional expertise exceeded his own in matters of civil rights law. His remaining questions were perfunctory, boxes checked rather than strategies pursued, the recognition visible in his posture that the hearing's outcome had fundamentally shifted. Officer Tricia Vance testified next, her manner careful, her words selected with the precision of someone navigating between competing loyalties. The IA transcript had shown the cracks in her solidarity with Gentry. Now, facing an administrative panel with a federal prosecutor watching from the witness table, those cracks widened into something approaching truth. I observed Officer Gentry make contact with the subject's face. Contact? He struck her, open palm. I saw it happen. Did the subject make any movement that, in your professional opinion, justified that strike? The pause stretched long enough that the court reporter looked up from her machine, uncertain whether testimony was continuing or had stopped. No, she was walking toward the exit. Her hands were at her sides. I did not observe any threatening behavior. Yet your initial statement to Internal Affairs suggested you did not have a clear view of the interaction. I was being careful with my words. I had concerns about contradicting a fellow officer's account without being certain of the consequences. And now? Another pause. Now I am under oath before an administrative panel, with a federal investigation ongoing, and I understand that my professional future depends on telling the truth rather than protecting a colleague who violated policy and common decency. The statement landed with the weight of institutional betrayal, the blue wall cracking under pressure that proved stronger than loyalty. Vance continued her testimony with increasing candor, describing the coordination that occurred after the arrest, the conversations about how to frame the narrative, the pressure she felt to support the official version of events, even when that version contradicted what she had witnessed. Sergeant Sims spoke to me before I filed my initial report. He suggested certain phrasings, encouraged me to focus on the subject's non-compliance rather than on Officer Gentry's conduct. I understood what he was asking me to do, and I am ashamed to say I initially complied. Why are you changing your account now? Because I became a police officer to serve and protect, not to cover up assaults on citizens exercising their rights. Because I watched the body camera footage and could not reconcile what I saw with what I had written. Because if my silence contributes to a pattern that allows this to continue, then I am as responsible as the officer who threw the punch. Sergeant Sims did not testify. His attorney had advised against it, the calculation being that silence generated fewer problems than the cross-examination his statements would invite. Instead, his defense relied on procedure and precedent, the argument that his conduct fell within established parameters, even if the outcome proved unfortunate. The panel was not persuaded. The findings came down on day 74, 1 week after the hearing concluded. 32 pages of analysis, conclusions, and recommendations that would reshape the department's leadership structure and send ripples through the ranks. Officer Dale Gentry. Termination effective immediately. Finding of excessive force in violation of department policy. Finding of false statement in official report. Referral to county prosecutor for potential criminal charges under state assault statutes. Referral to Department of Justice for potential federal prosecution under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Sergeant Victor Sims. Suspension without pay for 180 days. Finding of failure to supervise. Finding of improper influence on subordinate officer testimony. Recommendation for demotion upon return to duty. Separate investigation opened regarding pattern of similar conduct in previous cases. Officer Tricia Vance. Reprimand for initial false statement. Commendation for subsequent truthful testimony. Required retraining on constitutional rights and use of force policies. No termination in recognition of eventual cooperation with investigation. Deputy Chief Warren Cole. Referred for separate investigation regarding supervision of internal affairs response. Finding of inadequate oversight. Recommendation for administrative review of command responsibilities. The union appealed immediately, as everyone expected. Gentry's termination was characterized as politically motivated retaliation for doing his job. The federal investigation was blamed for creating pressure that denied officers due process. The consent decree negotiations were framed as external interference with local law enforcement sovereignty. None of it changed the fundamental calculus. The evidence was clear. The violations were documented. The pattern extended beyond this single case into a culture that would require years of federal oversight to address. Day 112 brought the formal announcement of the consent decree, the negotiated agreement between the Department of Justice and Riverton County that would govern departmental operations for the foreseeable future. The document was 53 pages long, the accumulated requirements of institutional reform translated into binding legal obligation, mandatory body camera activation for all citizen contacts, use of force reporting requirements that exceeded national standards, civilian review board with actual authority, not just advisory capacity, annual audits of complaint handling procedures, training reforms that emphasize de-escalation and constitutional policing, community engagement mandates that required officers to build relationships rather than simply respond to calls, and oversight. Federal monitors with access to departmental records, ride-along authority, and the power to recommend sanctions when compliance fell short. The monitor appointment would last 18 months initially, with extension provisions if progress proved insufficient. Nadine watched the press conference announcing the consent decree from her office in the federal building, the same office she had occupied for 4 years while building cases against officers in other jurisdictions who had committed violations similar to those she had experienced. The irony was not lost on her, that proximity to the problem had not protected her from becoming its victim, that professional expertise had meant nothing in the moment when Officer Gentry decided that a black woman, asserting her rights, deserved punishment rather than respect. But the irony cut both ways. Her expertise had also meant that the violations were documented, challenged, and ultimately addressed in ways that most victims could never achieve. Her resources had meant that the institutional resistance encountered obstacles it could not overcome. Her position had meant that the story did not end with dropped charges and buried complaints, as so many similar stories ended. The question that remained was whether any of it would matter. Whether consent decrees actually changed institutional culture, or merely papered over problems until monitors departed and old habits reasserted themselves. Whether terminated officers found employment in neighboring jurisdictions where their histories followed them but did not disqualify them. Whether the deputies who remained on the force absorbed lessons from their colleagues' fates or simply learned to be more careful about when cameras were recording. She did not have answers to those questions. No one did. Not yet. The work of institutional reform moved slowly, its successes measured in decades rather than months, its setbacks as predictable as its progress. What she had was something smaller but more immediate. A bank manager named Evelyn Marsh, terminated from her position after the consent decree prompted corporate headquarters to review policies regarding suspicious person calls. A settlement from the county that acknowledged wrongdoing without admitting liability, the contradictory language that allowed institutions to pay damages while claiming innocence. A notation in Officer Gentry's permanent record that would follow him wherever he sought employment in law enforcement, a scarlet letter that might or might not prevent him from pinning on another badge in another jurisdiction with less scrutiny, and a mystery that remained unsolved. The email from day one, the one the anonymous source had sent alongside the body camera footage, the one that showed someone coordinating the response while Nadine was still in custody, the message about handling paperwork and discussing matters Monday. The sender and recipient remained redacted, their identities protected by privacy provisions that even federal investigators could not easily pierce. The internal investigation that should have identified who wrote those words and who received them had concluded with findings of insufficient evidence, the institutional machinery protecting its own, even as it sacrificed the officers whose conduct was too visible to deny. 6 months after the assault, Nadine returned to First Regional Bank. The building looked the same, morning light streaming through the same tall windows, marble floors polished to the same mirror shine. But the faces had changed. The security guard was different, younger, his patrol pattern less aggressive in its attention to particular customers. The teller who greeted her was not Cassidy, whose testimony during the investigation had earned her a transfer to another branch. The manager's office behind the counter held someone new, a man whose nameplate she did not recognize. She approached the reception desk and requested notary services. The wait took 7 minutes, not 20, and no one questioned her presence or her right to be there. The notarization itself was routine, signatures witnessed and stamped, the property purchase that had started everything finally completed 6 months after it should have been. The teller who processed her paperwork, a young woman named Diane according to her name tag, hesitated as she handed back the completed documents. "Ms. Prescott? I wanted to say, I was here that day, not at work but in line. I saw what happened." Nadine accepted the documents, waiting. "I did not record it. I was too shocked. But I gave a statement to the investigators afterward. I just wanted you to know that not everyone who was here looked away. Some of us saw it, and some of us spoke up when it mattered." "Thank you for that. Witnesses matter more than people realize." Diane nodded, the gesture carrying weight that exceeded simple acknowledgement. "What they did was wrong, and I am glad something happened because of it. My mother always said that wrong things stay wrong until somebody does something about them. I guess you were the somebody." The observation stayed with Nadine as she left the bank, completed documents secured in the same portfolio that had been seized and returned, and had become, in a strange way, a symbol of what persistence could accomplish. Wrong things stay wrong until somebody does something about them. The simple formulation of a truth that institutional complexity often obscured. She had done something. Many somethings, over many weeks and months, building a case from evidence and testimony, and the stubborn refusal to accept that assault in broad daylight, recorded on multiple cameras, should end with nothing but her own humiliation. The doing had cost her. Not her career, not her position, not the things she had feared losing when she first decided to pursue the complaint rather than accept the settlement the department had quietly offered. But something else, harder to name. The final remnants of faith that the system she served would protect its own servants. The belief that professional credentials provided immunity from the treatment routinely inflicted on those without such credentials. She understood now, in ways that no case file or victim interview had ever communicated, what it meant to be vulnerable before institutional power. To have your existence questioned, your presence challenged, your rights contingent on the mood of whoever held authority in that moment. To know that compliance meant nothing if someone decided it meant nothing, that following rules provided no protection when the people enforcing rules decided to break them. That understanding would shape her work going forward. Every case she prosecuted would carry the memory of a hand rising, connecting, the crack of impact echoing off marble walls. Every victim she interviewed would receive the particular attention of someone who knew what it felt like to be disbelieved, dismissed, blamed for the conduct inflicted upon them. Whether that made her a better prosecutor or simply a more burdened one remained to be seen. The work continued regardless, case files accumulating, investigations proceeding, the slow machinery of accountability grinding toward conclusions that were never as complete or satisfying as justice demanded. Day 183 brought the criminal trial that would determine whether Officer Dale Gentry faced incarceration for his conduct that Saturday morning. The federal charges had been filed, the grand jury had indicted, and now 12 citizens would decide whether assault under color of law warranted the penalties that federal statutes provided. The trial lasted 4 days, testimony and evidence and argument filling the courtroom with the particular intensity that criminal proceedings generate. Gentry's defense was predictable. The call was legitimate. The subject was non-compliant. The contact was defensive rather than offensive. The video was ambiguous despite appearing clear. None of it convinced. The verdict came on day 187, after 6 hours of jury deliberation that felt longer than the entire trial. Guilty on 1 count of deprivation of rights under color of law. Guilty on 1 count of assault resulting in bodily injury. Not guilty on the false statement charge, the jury apparently unconvinced that the report's discrepancies rose to criminal falsehood rather than merely institutional spin. Sentencing came 2 months later, 36 months federal custody, followed by 3 years supervised release. Permanent prohibition on employment in any law enforcement capacity. Restitution in the amount of $75,000, payable to the victim whose face he had struck while wearing the uniform he had sworn to honor. It was not enough. 36 months for an assault that would have generated decades if the perpetrator had been wearing different clothes, occupying different status. The disparity was built into the system. The professional courtesy extended to officers, even when that courtesy transformed accountability into gesture. But it was something. More than most victims received. More than the department had ever faced for similar conduct. A marker, however inadequate, that some consequences followed some violations, that the wall of immunity had developed cracks through which accountability could occasionally penetrate. Sergeant Sims served his suspension, then retired rather than accept the demotion the department imposed upon his return. His pension remained intact, 22 years of service providing financial security that his conduct had never endangered. The separate investigation into his pattern of influence concluded without additional findings, the institutional protection extending just far enough to preserve what he had accumulated while preventing him from accumulating more. Deputy Chief Cole survived his investigation with a letter of reprimand that affected nothing except the contents of his personnel file. The findings of inadequate oversight generated no consequences. The command staff closing ranks to protect one of their own from the scrutiny they had failed to prevent falling on others. Officer Vance remained on the force, her cooperation having earned her the particular status of someone who had chosen the right side at the right moment. Whether her colleagues viewed her as hero or traitor depended on which colleagues were asked. The blue wall fractured along lines of conscience that the department's culture had never acknowledged, and the consent decree continued its slow work, monitors filing quarterly reports that documented progress and resistance in equal measure. Training programs implemented, then undermined by supervisors who resented external mandates. Complaint procedures reformed, then circumvented by officers who learned which boxes to check without changing underlying behavior. Body cameras activated, then mysteriously malfunctioning at moments when documentation would have proven inconvenient. The work was never finished, would never be finished. The forces that had produced that Saturday morning encounter persisted, despite settlements and terminations and consent decrees, embedded too deeply in institutional culture to be extracted by any single intervention. But the work continued regardless, case by case, complaint by complaint. The steady accumulation of accountability that might, over years and decades, shift the balance toward something resembling justice. Nadine's phone buzzed one evening, 8 months after the assault, with a message from a number she did not recognize. The text was brief, carrying implications that extended far beyond its handful of words. The email you flagged. We know who sent it. Not ready to move yet, but soon. Keep building. A friend. She stared at the message for a long moment, parsing its meaning, considering its implications. The redacted email, the one showing coordination while she was still in custody. Someone knew who had sent it. Someone was building something larger, something that required patience and evidence and the particular timing that federal investigations demanded. She saved the message, added it to the file she had maintained since day one, and returned to the case she had been reviewing before the interruption. Another complaint, another victim, another officer whose conduct required scrutiny and potentially consequences. The work is never done. The phrase had become something between mantra and burden, the recognition that accountability was not an event but a process, not a destination but a direction. Outside her window, the city carried on with its evening rhythms, lights coming on in towers where people lived and worked without awareness of the machinery grinding away in buildings like hers. Most of them would never need to understand how that machinery operated, would never file complaints, or give testimony, or wait for verdicts that would shape the remainder of their lives. But some would. Some always did. And when they did, they would find the resources and procedures and stubborn institutional processes that made accountability possible, however imperfect, however incomplete. They would find people like Nadine, whose professional obligations aligned with personal experience, whose expertise had been shaped by violation into something sharper and more purposeful than it had been before. They would find that wrong things could sometimes be made right, not easily, not quickly, not perfectly, but made right nonetheless through the patient accumulation of truth. And somewhere in the city, an officer who had not yet committed the violation that would end his career was making choices that would eventually bring him into contact with someone who understood exactly what those choices would cost. The work continued. The work always continued. The property documents she had finally notarized sat in a frame on her office wall now, a reminder of ordinary errands and extraordinary costs, and the particular satisfaction of completing what she had started despite everything that had tried to prevent it. She closed the file she had been reviewing, powered down her computer, and gathered her things to leave. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new victims, new officers whose conduct required the scrutiny that made accountability possible. Tonight, she would go home, to the modest 3-bedroom house she had finally purchased with those notarized documents, and she would rest. The exhaustion that came from sustained vigilance needed release, the particular fatigue of caring deeply about outcomes in a system that often seemed designed to prevent them. But she would return tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, because wrong things stayed wrong until somebody did something about them. And she had decided, on a Saturday morning 8 months ago, when a hand had risen and connected and changed everything, that she would be the somebody who did something. Always. The city lights flickered beyond her window as she left, the evening settling into night, the darkness gathering in the spaces between street lamps where anything might be waiting. But darkness did not frighten her anymore. She had walked through it, documented it, survived it, and emerged with the understanding that light was not given but created, built from the accumulated evidence of truth that no darkness could extinguish. She stepped out into the night and walked toward home, her portfolio under her arm, her work waiting for tomorrow, her story continuing in ways that no one could yet predict. The end of this chapter was also the beginning of others. That was how justice worked. Not conclusions, but continuations. Not endings, but the persistent effort that made better endings possible. And somewhere, in a precinct, or a bank, or a park, where someone had not yet been harassed for existing in the wrong place with the wrong face, the next story was already beginning. Someone would document it. Someone would file the complaint. Someone would persist through the resistance and obstruction and institutional protection that made accountability so difficult and so necessary. Someone always did. The work continued.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.